The forest was thick with mist, its towering pines swaying under the whisper of the wind. Ethan wiped the sweat off his forehead and pulled his jacket closer around him. It had been over a week since he lost his way in these mountains, and every passing moment was a battle between hope and despair. The map was gone, carried away by a sudden gust of wind when he had been trying to make sense of the unfamiliar terrain. His phone had long since died, and he was running dangerously low on supplies. He had been relying on instincts, gathering berries, rationing the last of his biscuits, and sipping from a stream he had found a few days before. The hunger gnawed at him, weakening his limbs and making every step more difficult. His body ached from exhaustion, his lips cracked from dehydration, and his mind teetered between desperation and determination. The night air was cruel, and his light jacket barely shielded him from the piercing cold. He shivered as he trudged forward, scanning the wilderness for any sign of shelter. His legs were heavy and his vision blurred with fatigue. That was when he spotted it, a small cave nestled against the mountainside. Relief washed over him as he quickened his pace, ignoring the sharp pangs in his legs. Ethan collected some dried branches and managed to start a small fire, the flickering flames casting strange shadows on the cave's rocky walls. He sat down, gnawing on the last crumbs of his biscuit, when he heard it. The unmistakable sound of rustling leaves, followed by the crunch of heavy footsteps on the forest floor. His pulse quickened. He turned his head slowly and saw it. A massive brown bear stood at the cave's entrance, its deep black eyes glinting in the firelight. It sniffed the air, its powerful muscles tense. Ethan froze. He had read about bear encounters before. Avoid eye contact, don't run, make yourself appear bigger. But none of that seemed to matter in this moment. He was trapped. If the bear charged, he had nowhere to go. The bear grunted, stepping forward, its breath visible in the cold night air. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He slowly reached for his backpack, where he had kept a protein bar, the last edible thing he had. With deliberate caution, he unwrapped it and extended his hand, his fingers trembling. The bear sniffed the air again, then stepped closer. Ethan held his breath. It was now mere feet away, its towering form casting a shadow over him. The bear sniffed the protein bar and then, with a careful motion, grabbed it in its jaws. Ethan flinched but did not move. The bear chewed slowly as if considering the taste. After finishing, it looked at him for a moment before lumbering back into the darkness. For what felt like an eternity, the two just stared at each other. A silent understanding seemed to pass between them. Then, with a final sniff, the bear turned and lumbered away. But Ethan knew it hadn't truly left. The following night, as Ethan tried to sleep, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps outside the cave. The bear had returned. This time, it didn't step inside, but sat just outside, watching him. The fire between them flickered, creating a barrier of light. Ethan, though terrified, felt an odd sense of reassurance. He wasn't entirely alone. The next morning, Ethan awoke to find fresh tracks leading away from the cave. Near the entrance, a small pile of berries and fish lay on the ground, an offering. He hesitated before picking them up. Was this the bear's way of repaying him? Or was it simply a creature of habit, sharing resources like it would with its own kind? Days passed and Ethan continued his journey, but the bear remained nearby, like a silent guardian. On several occasions he spotted it watching from a distance, never approaching, but never straying too far. One evening, when Ethan had failed to find food, the bear left another pile of fish near his campsite. He had no choice but to accept its help. One evening, as Ethan walked along a steep ridge, he lost his footing and tumbled down a slope, his ankle twisting painfully as he landed. He groaned, trying to stand, but the sharp pain forced him back down. Panic rose in his chest. He was too weak to go on. Just as despair took hold, he heard the familiar sound of lumbering steps. The bear appeared once more, standing at the ridge above him. Ethan held his breath as it slowly made its way down. It sniffed the air, then gently nudged him with its snout. He gritted his teeth and grabbed onto its fur, feeling its warmth. With surprising patience, the bear allowed him to lean against it, offering the support he needed to get back on his feet. For hours, the bear walked beside him, guiding him through the wilderness. Ethan leaned on it heavily, his legs trembling with exhaustion. Eventually, as they reached a break in the trees, Ethan saw a distant plume of smoke, signs of human habitation. Relief flooded him. He turned to the bear, eyes filled with gratitude, but before he could react, the bear simply turned and walked away, disappearing back into the wild. Ethan stood there, watching its massive form fade into the trees. He had survived, not just because of his own strength, but because of the unlikely bond he had formed with the beast of the wild. As he limped toward civilization, he carried a newfound respect for the creatures of the forest. A few days later, Ethan found himself back in town, surrounded by familiar faces. Yet his mind often wandered back to the bear. He couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again one day, and somehow that gave him the strength to keep going.